You guys are going to need to make some noise. So what we want to do, for those of you joining us on Facebook Live, we've got our Q&A panel. Jen, go ahead and pan around the room. Guys, make some noise. 2018 Physique Summit Conference. We're gonna do something pretty cool here, something that we haven't done before. Actually, the first thing we're gonna do, in 2016, we recognized Cliff and Jason and Logan Sheehan on stage because literally that week they had all won their pro cards. Where's she at? Oh, here she is. So Leslie, if you would, please stand up and recognize Leslie as the newest IFBB Pro in the house and Masters Nationals. Definitely wanted to recognize her. And then finally, last year we thought we need to start giving out some kind of an inspiration award. Something to someone who has gone above and beyond in the industry of bodybuilding as a whole. Not just NPC and IFBB or not just natural bodybuilding. It can be on the research side as a coach, as an athlete. So we came up with the Inspiration Award. And this year it's very, very important. This is our very first one that we did this right. So, this first person, we're not going to talk about who it is till the end. There's someone that no matter what they do, the first thing out of anyone's mouth is, that's a great guy. That's a great dude. Man, he's such a good guy. He's always helping people out. He's always putting content out. Even the people in the sport that have a lot of drama and negativity, even they never have anything bad to say about this guy. So he's very, very inspiring. And from a genetic standpoint, I'm going to turn this over to you because who can talk about having shitty genetics better than you, except for maybe this guy that we're going to recognize.
I think it's something special when you don't see a lot of people that are great athletes in terms of maximizing their own potential, as well as great coaches. And this person we're going to be honoring here today does both of these extremely well. He makes the most of his own potential and continually puts great athletes on stage. And overall, he just furthers the industry on every level.
Right, so I need you to pull your phone out because I sent you a text. So actually, another person in the industry sent me some stuff that he wanted me to read. So, all right, so first of all, this person is known for many things. His grainy physique, his intelligent approach to bodybuilding, how much he loves, his wife and children, a fascination with superheroes, even the occasional appearance of Wolverine-like chops. All right, if you guys aren't getting the hint, you're about to find out. I see beneath all these things an exuberance for living that emanates from a heart bigger than any of his skeletal muscles. It's my honor to call John my friend, and sorry guys, this is important for us, and think the same of me, to work with him on many occasions. Here's where it gets good. I'd also like to mention the naming of his business after a dog was almost like cheating. It's such a great idea. Lastly, I'm not ashamed to admit that I wonder if he didn't somehow cheat, quote unquote cheat, with his whole story about not having much of a colon. This seems to make it impossible for him to almost never hold water, but somehow never gain any body fat ever. And that's Dr. Scott Stevenson. Dr. Scott Stevenson's a great guy. He's actually watching. So, John Meadows he's awarded the first annual Inspiration Award. Yeah, please stand up. John to say anything that's hard enough for us to sit here and say some of that, but John, we definitely appreciate everything that you've done for the sport. Now, pressure's on next year, right? So, who's going to go above and beyond for next year? So the cool thing about this Q&A is we've got Michelle in the house. Where's Michelle? Michelle's in the back. All you have to do, we're live on Facebook, and we might take some questions live. But raise your hand, Michelle will come find you, and you just ask a question either for any of us specifically or for the panel in general. So it's really fun. This is where we want you guys to dig, because now you've got your time. Any question that you've ever wanted to ask, now is the time. So who's got the first question? Okay, Alan.
So this was kind of directed more towards Mr. Wildman's topic this morning, but protein sourcing, do you think that around 50% or more of your daily protein should come from animal sources like whole food chicken? And then also, as far as morning workouts, if you took like an EAA and a carb source, would that still be considered a meal, or do you think that you should eat a meal beforehand?
So I'll address, so the protein type, a lot of it comes down to, philosophy, diet, and so forth. I mean, if you're omnivorous, certainly as you move towards more animal protein sources, they're going to be more complete, more densely packed with, branch chains and leucine and so forth. So they're a little bit more aligned with, stimulating muscle protein production and driving it all the way home. However, some of that begins to wash out when you consume more and more of it. But there's a trick to that because, sometimes when people, vegetarians try to eat higher protein diets, it's difficult for them to really get to those levels without plant-based supplementation and so forth. So I think if you want to get there, because it's potency per gram to some degree, sometimes there's cost considerations and so forth, but I think there's good logic behind the idea that, the animal-based protein sources are definitely more potent. You get a bigger bang for your gram buck, if you will, physiologically. And if you have the luxury of being able to utilize or to align more of your protein intake around animal and even dairy-based, I think that's that's really going to help create greater efficiency in the protein that you eat. That's one thing. And then the second question, and this is a really great topic right now, the idea of, can you, if you're fasting or in a fasting state, can you get by with just essential amino acids? And I think the short answer is yes to a relative degree. And, there's a lot of debate on, different sides of the table here, but you're providing the dietary essential amino acids for sure. You're providing the stimulatory amino acids in the branch chains, and more specifically leucine. However, you're not providing a lot of the additional non-essential building blocks and so forth. So it's better than nothing. I always like to look at it as more of a hierarchy. To absolutely do nothing from a nourishing muscle protein synthesis, stimulating, activating, and protein production, nothing equals nothing. So, but from there, I think the hierarchy may be branch chains to essentials, essentials to intact protein. I would typically recommend intact protein over essentials, but there are certain situations where whether it's the timing of it or whatever, where an essential may make a little bit more sense.
I just want to address or at least give my opinion about the morning fasted cardio, because it's a kind of hobby horse topic and one that I've studied. So we carried out a study where we showed no differences in body composition between, we controlled it, we had one group trained fasted, the other group trained fed, and then we fed the fasted group after. Really no differences in body fat whatsoever. But even on a theoretical basis, it's just to me you're not seeing the forest from the trees, so you should be looking at fat burning in a narrow window. What you lose, or what you may be burning within 30 minutes or 45 minutes, whatever, of a cardio session, means, I don't want to say nothing, but extremely little, if not nothing, over the course of a full day and a full week. You should be looking at fat burning across time, because you don't step off the treadmill and then step on the scale and say, how much fat did I lose? It's irrelevant. You're not stepping on stage at that point. And there's multiple reasons why the concept of, well, you can make, they've done a very good job marketing the fasted cardio concept. When you actually look at the science, which I have, and I've actually written a paper on it, a review paper. Number one, where is the fat coming from? So you can see greater fat oxidation. much of it tends to come from intramuscularly. It's not your subcutaneous fat stores. The body uses its first line of fuel is intramuscular. It's just easy fuel to use. And the more trained you are, the more intramuscular fat you're going to use. So when you're looking at fat oxidation in a RER, in a hood, whatever you're going to use, a FitMate, it's not telling you where the fat's coming from. So you have to look at that, number one. Number two, there is evidence that if you eat before a meal, your thermic effect of exercise is heightened, so the EPOC is heightened afterwards, and other factors as well. So in my humble opinion, if you're slaving, if you want to train fasted, that's one thing, but if you're doing it because you think it's going to get you shredded, I think you should look for a different strategy.
I have two questions for Brad. So the first one is just how important is it that for that 75% or 80% of your 1 rep max that it's going up over time? So progressive overload, like where is that for someone who is training for hypertrophy? And then the second question was just how are you defining well-trained individuals? Because is it training age or how much lean body mass? Because I've been training for 4 years, but I'm not nearly as well-trained as most people here.
Second question first. So well-trained is a subjective statement. We say that, so it's really resistance training. When I say well-trained, that is subjective, but it's resistance training. Our qualifications are training a minimum of 1 year, a minimum 3 days a week, and squatting and bench pressing throughout on a regular basis. So that's our qualification. That does encompass a wide range of people. So the average 4 years, some are training 1.5. We have people that are training 10. And if you actually look at the training ages, they can be quite different. And also, just as you kind of point out, there's people who have been training for a year that are light years above people training for 10 years, just based on how hard they're training and what they're doing. So yeah, there's a lot of caveats there. But I would say that there's two things there. Number one, it takes the newbie effect out. The most important thing for me when we're doing a resistance train study is that they're not getting these newbie gains. They already know how to train. It's not coordination that they're getting. So that really baselines it, and that's really important. And the other thing that when you're randomizing, when you have a sample of 30 people, you assume that they'll be randomly distributed, so that there'll be just as many in this, that ultimately they'll both even out. That's the assumption you make. And to the first question, how important is it that someone continues to progress strength-wise? I would say it is important. Overload, by the way, so you have to remember when we talk about progressive overload, it's not just about load. The word load, you think the word overload is about load, but you can overload by increasing volume, you can overload by decreasing rest intervals, so there's multiple strategies you can take. I do think there is a benefit to increasing strength because you get, at a given repetition range or time under tension, if you're using heavier loads, you're creating more mechanical tension on the muscle, which is a driver of hypertrophy. But there's other factors as well that should not, in my humble opinion, be the sole focus to drive your 1RM up. So, like I discussed before, periodizing volume, I think, is probably as important, if not more important, in providing a good overload response from a hypertrophic standpoint. John, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, the load part of it is, it's great, but we can't all, I'm going to state the obvious here, get stronger every single workout for the rest of our life. So at some point you have to think, okay, now what else can I do? So a lot of what I do is I'll have people work their volume up over 6 weeks, pull it down, work the volume up again. That's one approach. Another approach that I use is I make them work the repetition range up. So we'll pick an exercise. Okay, this week you're going to do 8 reps with it. Next week you're going to squeeze out 9 or 10 reps with it. The week after that you're going to squeeze out 10 or 11 reps with it. And then the 4th week I'll have to do 12 reps. And then the 5th week they'll come back, say, now let's see what you can do for 8. And they're always stronger. So I just think that people get real consumed by the amount of weight they're actually lifting. But as Brad said, think about volume, think about your repetition counts, and things like that, because no matter what you're doing, eventually it'll quit working. So you have to solve that problem and figure out a different way to keep progressing.
So my question is basically just to anyone who has an answer for it. So my understanding of estrogen is that it promotes osteoblastic activity, cell proliferation, nitrogen oxide release in the body. Is there any research on bodybuilding athletes and birth control or estrogen supplementation by any chance?
No one wants to answer that. Where's Jason Theobald? Get up here. Hey, if you guys have something on that.
I mean, I can speak. There is, estrogen is an anabolic, is the female anabolic hormone. So it's certainly nowhere near as anabolic as testosterone. When a woman goes through menopause, her muscle building potential goes down substantially. I've not seen any research specifically on, so certainly it's been shown that you get greater bone, that the loss of bone is attenuated when they go through hormone. When you talk about estrogen therapy, I assume you're talking about hormone replacement therapy, or what type of estrogen therapy?
I guess more along the lines of like birth control pills, and then if any effect that would have, like any extra, is there any, I guess, downside for it?
You know, I have not, I can't speak intelligibly on that. I don't recall. I might have read so much research, and that hasn't stood out to me as something, but I would say that if you're losing your period, that will have negative effects, both as you talked about on osteoclast activity, which is resorption of bone. We know that with the female athlete triad, is eating disorder leads to amenorrhea, which leads to bone loss. So having a stable period would be beneficial, but I guess it then depends upon how regular you are. If you're talking about regulating your estrogen levels, I have not seen. So
I've got something actually.
Well, I was going to say real quick, out of all the women that I've ever trained, you know, I've never seen any issues with it, because they've been taking it for the whole time. So their hormones are where they're at, you know what I mean? So I've never seen any issues with it out of all the women I've ever trained.
So we've got someone in the house, a couple people that we can go ahead and let everyone know who you are, sure, and then speak on that, because we do have an expert in the house.
How you doing, everybody? I'm Vince Pitstick, owner of Nutrition Dynamic. I do some stuff with hormones quite a bit with doctors, but estrogen, it depends on what kind of birth control you're on. So it's a big conversation between low estrogen versus like yes. So you want to know which one you're on to decide which way you want to go first. So that's a big part of it. So if you go low estrogen, you're gonna bring your estrogen down. That's gonna have a big impact on bone. But otherwise, the rest of them tends to hold. It can hold muscle, it can hold fat. That's the problem. So what you're using matters first. So understand what you're using, how that works, and then ask the question, how is that affecting like my performance?
Yeah. Thanks, Vince.
Yep.
So yeah, great answer.
I always want to know what you guys thought of intermittent fasting. I personally don't care for it, but I see it a lot, especially on social media, internet. I don't care for it, so I want to know what you guys thought.
Yeah, I can weigh in on that real quick, just from for my clients. This is a bodybuilding conference, so if someone's goal is to be as lean and as shredded as possible, I don't think it's necessarily as good, because you're giving up those multiple protein feedings. This is something, Robin's probably right up your alley. You're missing multiple protein feedings during a day if you fast from the time you go to bed, and then you wake up and you go until 12, for example. There's so many different windows people use these days, but I hate to see people go 6, 10, 12 hours or more without eating protein, because you miss out on those multiple spikes in protein synthesis. So we're bodybuilders, performance athletes. We want to have as much muscle and strength as possible, so why would you give that up? However, I am a proponent of carb fasting. Jason, we talked about that on the podcast. Still having your protein and some fats, but carb fasting to create a little bit better insulin sensitivity. And I just never want to see people go. Joey Antonio always says the eating is anabolic, Dr. Jose Antonio. And it's definitely true, especially when it comes to protein. So for a lifestyle, here's the thing, I don't want to eat whenever I wake up. Today I've eaten twice because I'm stressed out. I don't want to eat, you know what I mean? So for a lifestyle, I'm not trying to get on stage. I could go do that and be able to walk around and not have to worry about it. So I think for a lifestyle client, if they can stick to that better, or mentally, if they want to be able to eat a whole bunch of food at once, and that helps them stick to a certain calorie count per day, like Gen Pop clients, I'm okay with that as well. I'm not going to judge them. But for folks in here, if we're trying to do what we're doing, trying to be as lean as muscular as possible, not a fan of it.
I'll just add real quick, because I know you want to touch on this too, but in general, when you go to the gym, your mindset should be, I'm going to build muscle, in my opinion. It's not, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to burn a bunch of fat. It's when I'm going to go do weight training, I'm going to build muscle. In order to do that, you have to have the nutrition around your training to support that, whether it's carbs for energy or intra-workout, whatever. But to not eat and to go in there fasted, I think is limiting your ability big time to grow. Now, if it's just for a health reason or whatever, or convenience, or it fits into your lifestyle, that's one thing. But you know, the people I work with are like, they want the absolute maximum amount of muscle they can develop. So I want their nutrition to support that. You can't look at nutrition in this box and training in this box. They have to kind of mesh together. So if the goal is the maximum amount of muscle, then you know, I'm not a big fan. If there are other goals, then yeah, maybe it's possible.
So I would challenge us to think about the concept of intermittent fasting and see where we want to go with it. And if you know, one of the things that, you know, I always like to talk about is the separation of macronutrients. I don't believe a calorie is a calorie, and I don't believe that in an intermittent fasting scenario that all macronutrients, all calorie, you know, supplying macronutrients should be avoided for those periods of time. I do believe that you would be fine doing a protein-fed intermittent fasting protocol, because I think what we're really talking about is just fuel. You're talking about separating fuel out of the diet for periods of time, not necessarily protein, because protein is going to have sort of a different role. By and large, its action is going to be as an anabolic stimulus on the muscle itself. I think also when you go through those periods of fasting, then you have to time your exercise around it. The last thing you want to do is you want to train on an empty stomach. Okay, you don't want to train and go, oh gosh, I can't eat for another 3 hours. Okay, you just throw that right out the door. So then you have to plan your training around it when it happens. But in the general population, we used to call this breakfast skipping. And you know, so people would eat until noon, and then they would eat up until dinner time, and that was it. And then they would have that huge chunk of time, you know, around the backside of the day where they wouldn't eat anything at all, and it was highly non-successful in the general population from a weight management standpoint. So you know, I think the anabolic stimulus of protein, or even, you know, this might be a scenario where branched chain, not branched chain, but essential amino acids at the very least should be applied in these periods where you're trying to limit fuel, because I do think that's what we're talking about, is limiting the fuel content of the diet within little periods of time, not necessarily the actions of protein or essential amino acids. So I just challenge us to rethink it. We actually have studies going on right now where intermittent fasting scenarios, and we're applying essential amino acids plus whey protein isolate during those periods of intermittent fasting. You know, and I think the data suggests that intermittent fasting is, you know, fairly successful from a weight loss standpoint. However, you know, are you thinking quality of the change in body composition, which, I mean, that's where we should all be thinking, is how do I preserve the muscle while I wean the body off of some of its fat? So I think where we're going to land on this is intermittent fasting will be all about the fuel nutrients, not so much about, you know, restricting either essential amino acid sources like intact protein, but just doing it wisely during those times.
But this actually has been fairly well studied. Well, certainly the intermittent fasting as far as fat loss, and what you can say conclusively is there's no magic about intermittent fasting. It's not, contrary to what some people promote it with the books and other programs, there's nothing, I've seen some like these YouTube things, like it's the best thing since air conditioning, and that's just not the case. But basically, its main function, it helps to control energy intake, which drives energy balance. Is ultimately the prolonged balance between energy intake versus outtake is going to mediate whether you gain or lose weight or stay the same. But there has actually been a couple of studies recently that have looked at it in conjunction with resistance training. So the vast majority of research has been carried out in sedentary obese subjects. Why? Because that's who the government gives grants to study. Unless you're diamondized. So there's been a few studies that, two that I know of, that have looked at resistance training in healthy, normal weight individuals with an intermittent fasting versus non-intermittent fasting protocol. And by the way, based on theory, as Rob talked about, spreading out your protein intake should be important for maintaining or enhancing muscle, or maximizing your muscle. So as he really eloquently described, that your continual anabolic, keeping your body continually in an anabolic state will, at least theoretically, help to drive a positive protein balance. However, the two studies, the first one looked at a 4-20 intermittent fast, so 4 hours of eating, 20 minutes off, and it showed it blunted muscle growth. The next study looked at 8 versus 16 and showed no differences between the normal eating pattern. A couple things that I would say as far as that goes. So first of all, 2 studies, it would seem that, yeah, you really probably aren't blunting it too much, at least based on that study. Remember that when you send out these people into the field, you don't know what they're doing. So unless you're locking them up in a med ward, which try getting funding for that and helping these subjects, which is not happening. John, you signing up for that one? No. So, you know, whether they're actually doing the intermittent fasting or not is equivocal. I don't know. And also whether how well are the other person's eating. So when it comes to feeding studies, you have to be very careful with looking at what is stated in the literature. When we get every time I do a study, I do a dietary food recall, or a food diary, I'm sorry, which is even more, supposedly more exact than food recall. Basically, you tell them, all right, here is MyFitnessPal, which probably many of you know. You're going to track your foods over 5 days. We're going to at least 2 or 4 weekends, last weekdays. And we're going to then see how you eat versus the control group. The stuff that I get back sometimes, I'm like, there's no way these people are. And I get like a 220-pound guy who gained 8 pounds, and he's saying that he's eating like 1,200 calories. And I'm like, something's not right here. So, bottom line is, I think we need to take the literature with some degree of grain of salt there, and that based again on what Rob said, it probably is not the greatest for muscle building, and it can be a viable fat loss strategy if that's your only goal. That's my own take.
This is for Rob. You talked about timing and type of protein, the importance starting to diminish in a protein-repleted body. And I'm wondering if that still occurs at 1.4 to 2 in like the over 40 female population.
Yeah, 1.4 to 2.
Yeah, you gave some minimums of 1.4 to 2 grams per kilo.
Right, and those are the that's the range. Those are the ranges, the combined ranges of ACSM and ISSN. And that's, those are base minimums for, for protein in order for people who are training or engaged in athletic, competition and so forth. These are good target levels to serve the floor, if you will. So if your question is, at that level, if you're a male and you're down closer to 1.4, does timing and type become more important? Is that your question? Or at what point does timing and type become more important?
Yeah, I'm wondering if women are consuming enough protein at these numbers, because most people have the issues with the timing and type.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, do they need casein at night? Do they need whey throughout the day? Does this become less important at those same numbers?
Well, I think, and like some of the work that Brad's done and others as well, they've determined that sort of the sweet spot, if you were to sort of find that threshold number in there, it probably lives somewhere around 1.75 grams per kilo. So, I would say, and then you mentioned aging as we get a little bit older, and we always talk about 50 plus, like at 50, all of a sudden you need more protein. But, I think that as, it is a continuum, and as we age, we tend to require a little bit more protein to provide the same degree of stimulus that protein does provide. So, for women in general, a lot of the women that I work with, they're very calorie conscious, and along with it goes protein. There's a little bit of a struggle in there sometimes to get them at 1.5 or above. Is where I've usually found that they're, if I can get them up over 1.5, then it's a little bit easier. And the reason why is because when I'm able to get them into higher protein intakes, almost without fail, they tend to see benefit. And the other part of it is, and this is a really unique, interesting phenomenon that we tend to see in the world of protein, is that for people who train, male and female, higher protein intakes, even if you layer it on top of what they're taking in calorically, so it would be incremental calories above a weight maintenance caloric target, they don't seem to gain any body fat. And for some of them that are coming from a lower intake, it may serve them from a body composition standpoint well, and for others that are, just habitually high protein consumers, and and then you layer on a little bit more protein, it doesn't hurt. So there's a really interesting thing going on with higher protein intakes. And so I guess to answer your question, when I work with a lot of the women just seem to struggle a little bit with protein. They seem to struggle with it first thing in the morning, and they seem to struggle with it with timing. They don't want it at night either. I mean, that seems to be a big thing. But once I get them up over 1.5, even closer to 2, and they get comfortable with it, rarely do we see anything negative, and it's usually positive.
Yeah, hey, so I'm not quite 40 yet, almost, but I was taking in like 195 grams of protein in my off season, and I weigh 125 pounds, but I didn't see any problems with it, and my strength was great, was really, really good, so I don't think there's an issue, and it's not like I stored it as body fat either, so I think as we get older, we need more.
Yeah, you came to mind, but also I've talked about this numerous times on the TNT podcast with Cliff and other people. The other thing people don't realize when you're tracking every single gram of something, and you do get your calories up high in the off season, for example, and if you are counting the protein that's in some of the carbs, like oatmeal that you eat, in beans and stuff like that, it's not necessarily a very leucine-rich protein. So if you only are eating 120 grams of protein a day, you're a female, for example, and you train 6 days a week, and you're counting everything in the oatmeal and everything in the beans, you might not be getting enough leucine to maximize protein synthesis growth and recovery, and that's something I always think about. So I don't necessarily do things in kgs, but I've found a range for women that I've found is almost fail-proof as far as numbers. Most women, I won't get them below 150 grams of protein a day that are training like we train, right? I think that's enough. And the older they get, I have them go up to 175, 195, especially as they get older, because you need more leucine as you get older to be able to initiate protein synthesis. I've never had an issue, ever, with women eating high protein. If anything, it's helped keep them on the diet because it keeps them fuller. And there's Joey Antonio's done some studies where he had people eating hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of grams of protein, and they just got leaner and more jacked. So, literally, it's what the literature said. So I've never had any issues. John, you work with multiple females as well, correct?
Yeah, I think if I put a number on it, probably 1.25 grams per pound would be probably where most of them kind of shake out. Probably a little bit higher as you get older, but that's probably where the numbers shake out from my perspective.
Yeah, this one's for John Gorman. The other day you posted something about you had an NBA player on a ketogenic diet. You're talking about performance. You don't necessarily have to talk about them, but I feel like there's this misconception with ketogenic diets and performance that if you take your carbs away, then all of a sudden you're going to be weak and get small. But I feel like when I have this discussion with people, it's normally the gaps in the setup, how they're actually setting it up. Because we have this bodybuilder keto, there's a medical type of keto, and protein requirement, the protein's a lot different in these, and the fat intake's a lot different in these. So could you maybe talk about the setup a little bit? Because like I said, I think that's kind of where the argument's at.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different approaches to keto out there. If you Google it right now, most of the time you'll see like a 20% protein, 5% carb, 75% fat setup. But there's a huge issue with that if your calories are low or if your calories are really high. So to me, I base everything, Rob, in your talk, you talk about starting everything with protein. I think all of us here agree, protein's the base of everything. Protein is based off of lean mass for the most part. If you really get down to it when it comes to keto, Because if you have too much protein on keto, it'll turn it into carbs. It can kick you out of ketosis. You feel like shit. You get the keto flu, and then you quit. You're like, fuck this, I'm done. I don't want anything to do with it anymore. So getting protein set, and what I found works really well over the years with experimenting and just getting feedback from clients, is about 1 gram of protein per pound of lean mass. And that seems to be at least enough. And if they're a really small individual and their protein's really low, I might have them go ahead and sip some EAs or BCAAs throughout the day just to keep loosening up. But I start everything, Austin, with protein based on lean mass. So my guy in the NBA, his name's Byron Mullins, he responds really well to keto, but his energy is through the roof. Because let's face it, if you eat carbs, if you're not fueled right and you start to run out of carbs, you start to tank. And that's the last thing that you want during a performance event. So I will never run out of making ketones out of this fat on my body. And as lean as some of you guys are, you will never run out of ketones when you're in ketosis. So it's a very good fuel source. And there's a lot of research showing with distance running and things like that. Your girl Val Thompson that you prep, she's done a lot of long distance runs on keto. People just feel good. And it's just a nice, steady fuel source. So Byron likes that in the NBA. The other thing is he feels lighter. So any of us that have done a keto diet versus a carb-based diet, I just feel like a bloated fat pig when I eat a lot of carbs. When I'm on keto, I feel smaller, my stomach feels smaller, I feel like I'm, I don't know, just faster and lighter. And he feels that, but he's reported, you know, his vertical is up. Like these things that he's reporting is up. So I've really kind of maximized it for that individual. But even a physique athlete on stage, I still do the exact same setup because to me it's all based on lean mass. Carbs are really just trace carbs. So whatever you're getting from a whey protein, you get 2 to 3 to 4 there. Vegetables, you know, broccoli is half of sugars and half of fiber. So I mean, you will get some trace carbs there. Fiber, I make sure people get at least 30 to 50 grams of fiber depending on their total calorie intake. And the rest of it, you make it up in fats. And it's worked really, really well for me and my clients over the years. And I haven't had people report keto flu or feeling like shit as long as I set it up that way, if that answers your question. Are you guys getting feedback on this?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Okay. John, can I ask before we move out of it? So we just finished a study at Texas Women's University with dudes. And there are dudes that go to Texas Women's University. But anyway, it was a ketogenic versus a calorically balanced phenomenon with guys who were trying to put on muscle mass and stay lean and so forth. We did design it so that they achieved roughly about a 2 gram per kilo body weight for protein. So sometimes you see general recommendations for ketogenic, and I think it's somewhere around like 1.2 to 1.4 grams per kilo is kind of like the general, you know, dieting kind of thing. But, you know, again, I think regardless, you know, in a hard training scenario, the higher protein demands are, you know, your first and foremost thought with that. I do, you know, you mentioned the basketball player, and there are certain sports out there that are higher intensity, either, you know, short, repeated bout type of sports, where they do not do as well on a ketogenic diet, and it just comes down to, you know, to glycogen and the obligate carbohydrate utilization when you go into higher intensities. It's just the way it is. But what I think is really exciting about it is, and if any of you are working with athletes that are, you know, either in ketosis or whatever, or they're thinking about it or whatever, there is some application of strategic carbohydrate immediately before and during these types of sports. And anecdotally, and I haven't seen, and you know, we're trying to figure out the design of it, but I haven't seen that data yet. Maybe others have. But anecdotally, the feedback has been pretty good. The strategic application of carbohydrate relative to the amount of carbohydrate that would be burned during the athletic training or competition, and then testing themselves 3 to 4 hours later, and they're still in ketosis. So it does not seem to knock them out because the carbohydrate that is provided immediately before and during serves the muscle, serves the activity, and you know, it's pretty much a non-issue a few hours later on.
One other thing too, instead of using carbohydrates, I actually had him get intra-keto that you make. So it's immediate ketones, and he responds really well to that. You know, you and I were talking on the phone like a year and a half ago, And I was like, all right, I want to try your supplement. How do you take it? And you mentioned, hey, drink it on the way to the gym. Drink your ketones on the way to the gym. That way when you get to the gym, then they're starting to hit you, 20 minutes later, and you feel good through your workout. Most people are drinking them intra-workout, and then, 3/4 of the way through the workout, you're like, man, I feel good. These ketones are hitting me. Well, fuck, you're already 3/4 of the way done. So your intra keto has been very successful with my clients. His Granite supplements intra keto. It's actually out there at the S2 booth. So that's another option as well, as yes, introducing carbohydrates because they burn them up so quickly. But I've also found too, a lot of it's what can people stick to. So if they eat carbs, listen, if I'm on keto and I eat carbs, shut the fucking door. Like, I'm gonna go to the cabinet after I'm done. Once I introduce them into my body, I'm just gonna have to blow it out. So that's the other thing, there's a lot of coaches and trainers in here. If you guys are gonna try it yourself or try it with your clients, you have to find ultimately, one, what they feel good on, two, what can they stick to, because adherence is everything, and ketogenic dieting to me is the absolute hardest thing to stick to, and I only use it for a tool. Like, it's only for a very specific time. Byron was getting ready to play for the Orlando Magic in Vegas, so I had him do this run, and now he's eating carbs, in 5-6 days, carving up. So it's just a tool. It's definitely not magical, and it's not something 99% of us can stick to year round.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing here real quick, because I'm seeing something in the industry that really bothers me, and it's the proliferation of ketone supplements and people making these magic claims that if I drink ketones and I'm just burning tons of fat, like I can go to Dairy Queen, but as long as I drink my ketones, that is very misleading. And I know the people in this room understand that, but most people don't understand that. And the reason why I put BHB salts in my intra-workout was for people who were just on low calories, who needed a fuel source to train. Under no circumstance do I advocate not being fueled up when you train. So for people in low calories who felt a little rough, and for those of you who've done really hard diets, you know how it feels as you get kind of toward the end. If you're doing low carbs or whatever, you have to have a fuel source. So, but it's a source of energy, but it's not a magical fat burner. So I just wanted to tell you that, because in our industry, you're seeing it more and more and more, where people making these claims that if you drink these BHB salts, then you magically burn fat. No, you're actually just burning the fuel that you just put in your body. It's not coming from your adipose tissue. So just don't be misled by that. That's all I'm saying.
So earlier you Rob, you talked about eating like when you're hungry versus, I guess, like, I work with John, so I track my macros, and he's got me at like 240 grams of protein, which, I usually pretty well, and it's actually hard for me to actually not go over them most of the time. But I'm somebody that deals with hunger like a lot. Like right now, of course, that's when you're dieting, or deficit calories, it's to be normal, but even with, when I was working with John at 3,000 calories, I was 30, 45 minutes after I'm eating, I'm watching the clock, like, when's my next meal? What's your opinion on that? Because of my schedule also, my last meal is usually like around 7 p.m. And then I wake up at 2:45 to go train. So I'm usually, because I want to save that for like actual food, I don't take anything pre-workout. I just do like a branched chain amino acids or something like that. Like, I don't know, like any suggestions or.
You said you train at 2:45?
At 3:30 in the morning. Yeah.
In the morning?
Yeah.
I know. It's awesome. Yeah, that's incredible. But, when you look at it over a 24-hour period, it all works the same. It's just dark versus light. You digest, you absorb. The stimulus is the same during the nighttime hours as it is during the day. So physiologically, there's no difference. I mean, I think it's a good idea that, because your schedule is like that, there's a lot of individuals that are, and if you work with professional teams that have night games, that's a lot different than other, than swimmers who are in the water at 6 a.m. versus other athletes who may be on the field at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I mean, you have to work within their 24-hour period to really try to hone into nutrition and just to get everything right. But yeah, when we work with athletes, physique athletes, MMA, whatever it is, as a general rule, if they're hungry, and I don't track calories rigorously. I track calories within the 250s. And outside of that, I don't, I use that just when I separate the meals out, this meal should be somewhere around like, 500 calories, this one's like 750 or whatever. But if somebody says, oh, I got 750 or I got 350, I mean, that's maybe close enough. I don't really know because, it's food diaries and whatnot are only as good as they really are. But usually when somebody says, oh, I'm really hungry, I drive them back to number one, which is protein. And so I always work within the one is the protein foods, two is the health and the healthy wellness type foods. And that's just kind of my way of saying, nutrient-dense foods such as fiber-rich foods. So it's like your vegetables and so forth. And sometimes your ones and twos are the same. When somebody tells me they're hungry, I have them work within the ones and twos. Rarely will I tell them to work within the threes. And the threes are just more of your starchy carbohydrates, things that have a little bit more sugar to them, and more saturated fat sources and so forth. That I consider more fuel. But hunger, in my view, is in my experience, has mostly been dealt with best with higher protein foods. And I think if you go back 10 years ago, there was a lot of emphasis on fiber and so forth, and volumetrics, and that being like the key to reducing hunger, as well as the stomach and so forth. But I don't know if that really panned out the way that we were kind of hoping. So I still, right now, as I see it, the most potent way to control, if you're looking at it from a macronutrient standpoint, is still high protein dense foods. So eat more protein.
I also just, you had mentioned BCAAs, so I'll get my little hobby horse in here. Personally, I see no, and when I say personally, based on a good amount of literature, I see no benefit. Not only no benefit, certainly you will get a spike in protein synthesis, but you're much better off taking in a whole essential amino acid supplement. If you want to take, not have a whole protein, like a whey protein, which really is weight in all the amino acids, but most importantly, the essentials. A recent study, and it's one of several, looked at BCAAs versus placebo, which is nothing, and showed a 20% spike in muscle protein synthesis. Problem is, that was half of what's seen when you had a full complement of whey protein, so all the essential amino acids. The body needs all the essential amino acids to synthesize proteins. You should not take half of or a third of the essential amino acids. Makes no sense. I mean, it's good flavoring for the water, if that's what you care about. Pretty expensive flavoring, but in my humble opinion, you're much better off with whey protein than you are with BCAAs.
I had a question for you guys, just to get feedback. For me anyway, taking on a new client, the biggest struggle for the type of client and the point of working with them is when you're first taking on a brand new client who's never worked with a coach, they've never had to answer some of the questions on like an intake or an interview that you're asking, and they're not even that aware to some of their own sensitivities or reactions or adaptations. And so you're trying to discern where they start at, what's gonna work well, what might not, or what you're working with, but they don't know if they respond well to carbohydrates or fat, or they're not even that in tune to reactions to volume or intensity or overtraining. And let's say they've got good to maybe above average potential to compete, and you want to work with them, they're ready to go. How can you accelerate or get better insights earlier on to know where that person's at if what you're working with is very shallow, to find out where they're at and where they need to be?
Yeah, so man, that's a lot. Great question though, and a lot of this is an easy way out, but a lot of this is just done through experience and shoes and eyes from over the years of being able to at least get an idea of where. I've got an email that I just started somewhere, his name's Anthony. He's like, hey, I want to know how you got to my starting protein, carbs, and fats. A lot of it's just over the years I've been able to, what I have someone do is like track your food. I won't work with someone if they won't track their food. Like if I have no idea what they're eating, I'm to the point I'm like, listen, there's other coaches that will do it all for you, but I won't. Like you've got to track your food, send it to me 3 days worth, and then at least I know their calories. I can break down their protein, carbs, and fats. At least it gives me an idea of what their body's used to. And then I find out through a questionnaire, I'm like, have you been dieting over the last year? What's that look like? What were your calories? How much weight did you lose? All these different things that tell me, if someone comes to me and needs to lose 30 pounds, they've only been eating 1,100 calories. I know I'm not going to start this girl off on 2,200 calories and she gains a bunch of weight, she's pissed. So a lot of it's data collection over the years, and then once I see that, I generally start most people at a protein range as far as females, because it's pretty easy to start somebody there. And then most people, I'll have them, you know, females, I like to have them at least eat 50 grams of fat a day, and I'll start them there. And the rest of their calories are made up from carbs, and that's just for me to watch and see how they respond to moderate to high protein, moderate fat, which is just 50 grams a day, and the rest made up in carbs. So maybe a girl's eating 150 protein, 200 carbs, 50 grams of fat a day, and I just watch with no cheating, and I watch and I adjust from there. If someone's gaining weight rapidly, they haven't been eating much at all. Some people will drop really fast. I'm like, you know what? You respond to carbs just fine. So a lot of that's just kind of done over the years, and what I do is I start somebody and then I just watch and I adapt. I mean, it's literally that easy. If there was a formula, if this was a math equation, if this was as easy, I said this last year, if this was easy and it was just math, I'd pull my shirt up and have six-pack abs, because I just have the exact perfect scenario, and I would cut this exact amount of calories and lose 0.5 grams of fat a week, you know, 0.5 pounds. That's what I'm saying. Like, a lot of this just comes to, it's an art form. Like, what we do coaching-wise is an art form.
Yeah, I just want to quickly add that I think people get way too paralyzed with having the perfect starting program. And the beauty in a plan is it's the adjustments that you make along the way. Nobody up here on this stage can look at every one of you and give you the perfect plan, even based on a thorough questionnaire. Again, the beauty is going to be in your eye and what you see, the data you document, the adjustments that you make. That's what's going to get them there. It's not the perfect plan, so I just wouldn't be overly obsessive about that. Just what we say is get in the ball game. Just get them in the ball game, get them moving, and then you can adjust as you go.
I even tell my clients, hey, this is going to be a trial and error at first. You know, I'm going to start you at this amount based off what you've told me in the questionnaire, but it could change 3 days from now, it could change in a week, it could change, and I just tell them that up front.
So, I'm going to call some questions, and I'll up to 5 questions still. First, so Bill was talking about earlier with the intermittent fasting, Rob, you were saying maybe at least take in like protein stuff, and that's what you recommend, like doing like more like a protein, like John was saying, protein and do the protein, but do a carb and fat fasting, like if somebody that wants to do the intermittent fasting like this, and make sure that there's at least drinking like a protein shake or something that like every 4 hours something instead of, you know, would you recommend that? And should I ask all the questions first, or do you want to answer each one like separately?
If I understood it correctly. So, you know, if you go back to like a couple of my slides, you know, and you know, once you identify your daily protein target, and then you drop it down into where that protein falls. If you want to do intermittent fasting on top of that, that's your thing. In my view, the intermittent fasting, you're fasting on, you know, basically carb and fat, not necessarily protein. So still maintain, you know, my recommendation, you know, what I would suggest is, because I think you're going to be able to get there as easily, if not easier, and get maybe better results from a body composition standpoint if you go ahead and you maintain that protein schedule. And maybe those proteins are very, very lean. Maybe they're in supplement form at that point. You know, maybe it's, you know, like even a whey protein isolate. You know, 25 grams, 20 grams, 25 grams, whatever it is. It's 100 calories, but it's, you know, it's like 96% of that is going to come from protein. So it's very concentrated protein. So I mean, that's why I was saying that, you know, just continue your protein regimen over the waking hours. Maintain the anabolic stimulus, and then if somebody wants to do the intermittent fasting, the protein still continues, then they just layer in the other macronutrients during that more succinct time period, if I answered that question correctly.
Yeah, I tried the
Let me add one more thing for you too, because number one, I don't think that's fasting, but number two, what Rob was talking about is what many of the top bodybuilders do to get in great shape. They put more of their carbohydrates around their training, so they use as fuel to recover glycogen, and the other meals are lower carbohydrates. So this isn't like some new type of fasting. This is what a very high percentage of bodybuilders do to get in great shape. They center those carbs for training, to train hard, and then periods of time that are away from training, they fast. That's not fasting, that's just, I think that's just like a standard way. Wouldn't you say, John, Jason? That's just a standard way that's high-level bodybuilding, is really what that is.
You train that. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I agree with that.
I just want to say, everyone fasts. So if you're waiting 3 hours between your meal, you're having a 3-hour fast. So really, yeah, it comes down to what the extent of the fast is, and really that is what needs to be clarified, and that's what really is up in the air. So just a point of note.
Yeah, I did that 16-8 for a while, and of course I did that, I ate it personally, so I like my 3 to 4 hour meals, personally, but not all my clients. Second one, so you said also that more protein as you get older, so if you have a client that is 40 plus, male or female, would you say that, it's better to go higher, the higher range of protein with that, with them, versus, somebody who's maybe younger?
So, I think there's a lot of unknowns still there, but I think what we do know is that as we get older, and I don't know if that's 40 or whatever, but we tend to, base some of this on, research that's been done, with 50 plus, 65 and older or something like that. It's just the inclusion-exclusion criteria of an experimental design. But I do think that the research, is suggesting that for, the general population or people who are not habitually trained and, they're used to higher protein intakes and so forth, they do tend to require a little bit more protein. I've seen some pretty high recommendations, anywhere from 1.2 to 1.4 to even 1.5 grams per kilo for people who are over the age of 50 and 60 plus and so forth. So, like I was saying earlier, it just doesn't, oh, I'm 50, I need more protein. I think that it probably happens over time, and I think it's probably, some of it is directly related to, the reduced mechanical stimulus on skeletal muscle, as we get older. We just don't challenge our muscle, and this is for generally inactive people. So to apply to individuals who, who spend their lives training hard and so forth, I think there's a lot of unknowns there as well, and I think we're just starting to look at some of the data in that area that maybe it's not as significant for somebody who, who has conditioned, trained muscle and has been doing it for a long period of time, that maybe the need isn't as high as it would be for somebody who is untrained, who begins training older, or, or you're just trying to match up, the anabolic stimulus of just a protein meal. So, I think that there's a little bit there as well. But, my recommendation on protein is, I do generally feel like people need more. I think we've emphasized the other macronutrients too aggressively over the last few decades, and we sort of left it behind, and for different reasons. But, here it is. It's one of the few macronutrients that we're actually talking about increasing in the diet instead of, retracting it from the diet. So, I think that, for most 40-year-olds, it's difficult to find anybody that doesn't have some kind of specific application, whether it's, they're trying to lose weight, or they're trying to exercise, or they're dealing with some kind of, medical scenario or something like that. I don't even know what the normal population is anymore. When they go, oh, they're abnormal, they're not part of the general population. Who is? It's just, those people, they're actually in the minority now, because once you start looking at the different buckets of individuals, whether it's, you see percentage of people who are trying to lose weight, percentage of people who are dealing with type 2 diabetes, percentage of people who are this age group, who are just beginning exercise, all these different things, all of a sudden you're at like 83, 84% of the adult population. So, you're just talking more protein needs in almost all of those scenarios just to have a more successful outcome. So, yeah, I mean, I think for 40-year-olds who are exercising and so forth, I mean, they're going to need to be up there. 1.5 to, or more is, would be, a good place for them to live, and more won't hurt. And if more means substituting it for other macronutrients that haven't been serving them well, go for it. So it won't hurt, it could probably only help. So give it a whirl.
on that time, do you find as people get older, postmenopausal women and so forth, that they use fat and better as fuel versus carbs, or is it more just individual based? Like, is there a difference as you get older, or do you use like, do you change? Can you use fat better or carbs better as you get older? Is that change to that? Do you see a difference as far as when the hormonal lab changes? Does that make sense?
No, as you get older,
Yeah, I don't think any of us has an answer for that, but to go back to Ralph's point about activity, if somebody's older but they're still really active and they're challenging their muscles, then they're probably going to use glucose for energy. But if somebody's sitting around and not real active, then what's the point of eating 3 or 20 grams of carbs a day? So I would just kind of think of it in that context.
Okay. So, and last question, since we are bodybuilding community, reverse diet, recovery diet, you guys' opinions, like what would you be best? Slow recovery, immediately back to pre-work, pre-show, macros, what, just opinions.
So, yeah, I love that question because my thought process on that is a 180 from what it was 2 years ago. I've completely changed my stance on that. And I used to be, okay, we're going to just slowly increase our calories. We're going to make sure we don't go crazy. And keep in mind, I'm working with people who are very competitive and they brutalize themselves in many cases to get incredibly lean. So that's my context in answering. But here's, the more I thought about it, I thought, that's kind of silly because they're not at a healthy body fat percentage. So in order for them to train optimally, they need to be at an optimal body fat percentage. And it's probably not 4% for a guy. It's probably more like 8 or 10 or 12. But my point is, it's not 4%. So what is the harm in getting them to that quicker? And I just thought about it more and more. So long story short, I'm much more aggressive in getting their calories up and getting them back to their baseline where I feel like their body fat's in a good place so that they can train optimally. And the second part was, it just isn't realistic with most people. They get done real hard diet. Man, they want to relax a little bit. They want to have some meals with their friends. And that seems crazy to me to say ultra strict and to not have, your friends and your family have some fun with them. So I'm sure a lot of people, that's probably not their thought process, but mine is to be much more aggressive and get them back to that healthy state as quickly as I can as opposed to dragging it out.
So I need to say something on that because I just came off a show. I was at about between 13 and 1,400 calories leading into my show. And Monday, after I cheated and ate my face off for 3 days, I started back on 2,100 calories. And I've been able to maintain this week about 5 pounds over stage weight. I put on body fat from eating a lot for 3 days, but I jumped right back to it. And I'm telling you, it's the best thing I've ever done because I haven't had to cheat on my diet thinking I'm starving still. And I can fit things into my diet way easier, and I'm not wanting to binge eat, post-show binge eat. So, and I've been able to stick to it, That's the hardest part is after a show being able to stick, if you're trying to slowly reverse on 1,400 calories, it's so hard to stick to that. Jump them up, and you can actually stick to it better. So, and it's been going really well. I feel so much better.
She's better. She's better, I promise you.
Yeah.
I might eat.
Yeah.
So I've actually received criticism over this because of the book that I wrote, talked about adding 10 to 15 to 20 to 25 carbs a week. However, the people criticizing me didn't completely read the book. The reason why I advocate adding small amounts is only under one circumstance. Most people, when they come off a harsh diet, are cheating and they're adding food outside of the diet. So that's why I'm an advocate of, if you're cheating a lot on the diet post-show and you're having a problem, you don't want to go to 2,200 calories and then still cheat 3-4 nights a week because you're going to rapidly gain fat. That's why if she was doing that left and right, yeah, she would have to walk her calories up slow because she'd be trying to offset that. And that, for the reality of most people that have dieted for a show, you're going to struggle post-show for a few weeks or a month or two. So being able to just add a ton of calories, you can try it, and she's doing it great because now you're not eating your face off because you literally jumped your calories up. But if you're somebody that's doing both at the same time, welcome to fat gain like a motherfucker. And you're going to 80. So it literally, that's why this comes back to coaching is an art form. That's why if you're working with clients, you have to get that feedback. Hey, I email my clients all the time. On a scale 1 to 10, how are you doing on the diet? If I see their weight going up, and they tell me, hey, I'm a 7, I had some extra food at a wedding and here and there. Well, I know I'm not gonna be able to add as much food that week as normal. So you have to get that feedback, or self-awareness if you're doing it yourself.
It depends on if it's a competitor or a regular client too. You know, competitors for me, I didn't want to stay that lean because I don't feel good. A regular client isn't that lean. They're just normal body fat, so you probably could stair step them up, and because they feel okay. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
One other final thing. Jason Wells is a perfect example. Down almost 200 pounds. We talked about him today. Sometimes when people have a lot to lose, we dieted for a year. I dieted you down to maybe 2,500 calories, right? And you're dropping, and it was time to give his body a break from being in a deficit. So we actually reverse dieted up very, very slowly, but he stuck to it perfect, and he continued. Would you drop another 20 pounds? Yeah. We went from 2,500 calories to 3,000. His metabolic rate started to speed up, and he didn't cheat like not one time. And he dropped another 20 pounds, raising calories. Now that's some unicorn shit, right? Shitting ice cream over here. But in reality, you have to think about that too. Like there is a time to raise it real slow because Jason needed to lose another 40 or 50 is what we were working on at that point. So it's not always just about coming off show prep, it's about what's the next step.
Yeah, so I guess I have a question for everybody in here. Who's all competed in a bodybuilding competition before? Okay, who's competed just one time? And was your, I guess, your reverse diet, was that good, or
well,
curious to know what your experience is?
So raise your hand. If you reverse dieted perfect after your first show, raise your hand. Bullshit, Chuck. I'm still working your reverse diet off your ass.
When I competed, there was no reverse dieting. It was just you bend your face off after you show. This was in the early 2000s. Reverse diet. I mean, I'm sure people were doing it, right? But back then, you just binge. That's what everybody did after their show. So there was no reverse diet.
That is 100% true. So I gotta tell some stories. Just listen. So after I went to Mr. Iowa in the 90s, there's a road called Morse Road by my house, and it's nothing but fast food restaurants. All right? So you go to Pizza Hut, you eat as much as you can, you sit, you gotta go to the bathroom, you go to the bathroom, you go to Friendly's, eat as much ice cream as you can. So I just started dating who's my current wife now. So she saw me like, a couple days before the show, and I weighed X amount. And then she saw me Wednesday, 4 days after the show, plus 30 pounds. So I go, I pick her up for lunch, my nose starts bleeding. She's like, what is wrong with you? What happened? But I'm gonna tell you, that in the 90s, man, that's what we did. We would just pig out. It was crazy. So don't do that.
So yeah, I would say, so this was my first season this year, and I would say it was very successful, but my reverse diet was not. So I'm curious to know what percentage of your first-time competitors have a very hard time reverse dieting?
100%. 100% of them.
To add to that, what are some interventions that you use for your clients that have one binge day that turns into 2 binge days, that turns into 3, and they are on that rapid fat loss gain? What are interventions that you use with your clients?
So Brad and I were talking about this yesterday. Back in the 90s and the 2000s, there was no such thing as cheat meal. Now, all of a sudden, people talk a lot about cheat meals and refeed meals. What I do with most of my clients that I think has really helped us a lot, certainly helped me personally, is you give somebody a cheat meal, you give them take your spouse out or go out with your friends, and within reason, enjoy yourself, have a hamburger, have some ice cream, whatever. If you have, let's say you're eating 5 times a day, if you have 35 meals in a week and 34 of them are perfect, and then you have that one, I gotta believe you're still gonna do really well. So what happens is every weekend, these people get something they enjoy. You know, they get to go have their ice cream. For me, it was Five Guys, burgers and fries. So when the show's over, all the other guys backstage are like, man, I haven't had pizza in 3 months or 4 months. I'm like, yeah, I had 2 pizzas last weekend. It was good. But when the show's over, you haven't went that long without something good. So like the cravings aren't nearly as bad. Some people mentally have a hard time with cheat meals, but that's there's some mental things there that are an issue that needs to be dealt with. But I think just intelligently giving people some cheat meals, some time with their family, their spouse, and things like that, and their friends, I think it pays dividends after the show because they don't feel nearly as, desperate for something.
Flexible dieting. That has been the biggest savior for me and for my clients. Because if you're craving something, you can make something fit, into your diet. And I mean, literally that's been the biggest thing that I've ever done. And then also jumping your calories right back up. If you're at 1100 at the end of show prep and whatever you were when you started, jump them straight back up. Because then you're not so hungry and you can fit different foods into your diet and still you kind of soothe those cravings without binge eating, if that makes sense. And fit stuff in.
Yeah, and then finally, sometimes you just have to tell them it's coming. Like, listen, you've been in a deficit. I mean, here's the thing. Sometimes they just need to understand it's going to happen and that they just need to be honest with you as a coach and say, listen, this is coming. You're going to be in the fucking cabinet at 2 in the morning and you're going to email me tomorrow and be like, Coach, I'm sorry. Because it's the more you restrict yourself from something, feeling full, the more you're going to have that backlash mentally on the other end. So sometimes they just need to get through it. Like they need to experience it. They need to feel fat and fucking gross. You know what I mean? And then they understand why they don't want to feel like that. But to try and avoid it, sometimes to me creates an even bigger problem when they just need to either jump calories right back up or understand that it's happening. But flexible dieting, we're not talking about flexible dieting like go to Domino's 2 weeks out and like, nothing wrong with that because John has been doing that. But I'm saying we're not telling our clients they can go eat whatever they want if it fits your macros, bro. We're just saying like she makes stuff. She makes pizzas at home and she counts. She's very, very specific in a bodybuilding sense. But that saves you. I mean, you're eating the most hated word in bodybuilding is Pop-Tarts. You're having Pop-Tarts post-workout, but mentally you were good. So she didn't really struggle much. I think the thing people struggle with more than the food if they're using flexible dieting is that feeling of being full. Because there's just no way to get around that when you're getting that lean. And I remember you saying in Pittsburgh, you're like, I just want to fucking feel full again. I don't care if it's a salad and vegetables. I just want to be able to eat and not be starving or lay in bed knowing I'm done for the day. I can't eat again. If I want to go eat, I can.
Laying in bed hungry.
That's an all-in steal.
I can't sleep but hungry.
We got time for probably about 3 more.
Okay, so you got a client, they're 10 weeks out, they look good, you're like, okay, let's do this, we're gonna get you ready for a show. So, for who it applies to, what findings have you found over the years that have established you as a coach in the business that you found that you absolutely need your client to do this to be successful on stage? And I know this is a broad question, but something that you've found, or a couple of things that you've found that are very important, like, yes, you have to do this.
Immediately what jumps to my head is the consistency in check-ins. So a client has to check in the same time, same lighting every week. When they just start, I start to really struggle as a coach when I get random pictures from the gym. Hey John, I think I'm looking good, what do you think? Dude, you're wearing a sweatshirt. But when people are like, the people that I've coached this year that have done the best are the ones that are absolute machines with their check-ins. Same lighting, because then as a coach, you can see much better what's truly going on. But when they're in different times of the week, different times of the day, then you're like, if somebody sends you morning check-ins and all of a sudden they send you an evening check-in, and they look a little more watery and they're 2 or 3 pounds heavier. Okay, well, that's normal throughout the course of the day. So, but that consistency really helps coaches. It really helps us. And when I get a client that won't do that, which doesn't happen very often because I'm very picky, but I would just tell them, like, this isn't going to work. Like, you can't do that. We're not going to be successful. Now I'm just throwing darts and just hoping it hits something. So that's one thing.
So John, you actually made a great post on Facebook, I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago, that said you've actually looked back at your clients that have done the best over the years, and they're always the people that are checking it on time. You're not having to chase them around. They're sending the good check-in pictures, and they follow everything, versus other clients that sometimes they're just kind of random, and they're emailing you on Sunday at 11 o'clock, or just random stuff, and they don't send pictures for 3 weeks, and they're, you know, those kind of people don't necessarily get as lean. It just seems to be a good correlation, and I read that and I was like, man, you nailed it on the head. So I know I've got clients that are watching Facebook Live right now that are emailing me randomly, and I'm trying to chase them, and those people, I struggle to get them lean sometimes. And I think because they're just not, if they're struggling with the easiest things, check-ins and pictures on certain days and times, and not something hard to ask for, I think that's one thing that's the easiest thing to control. So if they can't fucking do that, then what's their diet look like? What's their training look like? Like, how is their meal prep and planning looking like? They can't even send stuff on time. So I just want to mention that post was important. I know for me, the single most successful thing that I do that helps me get someone to stage is I will not take someone on without making sure they're properly set up to do a diet to get on stage. I'm not going to just take somebody that comes to me 10 weeks out and not know their calories and not know prior history. So I actually prefer to work with somebody for a year so I can do their off season, and then we start their prep, and I can prime metabolism, I can get their calories up, we can get used to back and forth communication with emails and things like that and check-ins. And then when it's time to diet, you know, if we're 20 weeks out, I'm like, all right, we're gonna start 20 weeks out, we're gonna aim for 1.5 to 2 pounds a week loss, kind of like you and I are doing, and we set it up that way. I just won't randomly take people on because our clients place well, right? It's not an ego thing, but they place well because we set it up on the back end. I will not take somebody on that I know I can't get them shredded for stage, because then it looks like I can't do my job. And I don't want to take someone's money if I can't do it. If they just only lose 10 pounds on stage, well, fuck, I just wasted their time. I'd rather be honest with somebody. So pre-planning and screening is the most important thing I do, hands down. Dieting and all that stuff's important, but it all goes out the window if you're not set up correctly on the back end.
I think training intensity is really important too to watch, because as you get closer into your show, your training intensity just kind of automatically goes down because your energy is low. But if you can have them maintain their training intensity the whole entire prep, that will help a lot, because you won't have to start adding in more and more cardio just to make up for them not training as intense as they were at the beginning.
Say it again.
So what do you recommend for people with irregular schedules? So I'm a nurse, so I work like minimum 12 and a half hours. It could be like 14 hours a day. So for those days I'm on my feet all day long versus like rest or off days, I'm not really on my feet as much. And then if you work like night shifts, like do you have any clients that work night shifts, and what do you do in terms of like diet or changes and like plan?
Well, we kind of talked about that earlier with your 24-hour period is the same. Like, you just make it, your breakfast might be at 1 o'clock in the morning, but it's your 24-hour period. So you're eating your meals the same as somebody that starts at 6 a.m. You know, does that make sense? So it's just your 24-hour period. Well, another thing you can do on your down days, your off days, you could actually drop your calories a little bit because you're not burning as many calories. So that can be your off day diet. And I mean, those are my 2 suggestions.
I like to recommend, so if you know you have a really long, hard day, be flexible with your training that day. So if you have heavy ass squats and you just work and then you're running on 4 hours sleep, maybe you change that to a higher rep leg day, higher rep squat day. And you know, with all the research that's out, Brad, that you've done on higher rep versus heavy training and things of that nature, maybe you should be flexible with your training that day and do higher reps that day, so it's not as hard on the CNS, not as hard on your body, but most importantly, because you'll have a good workout, because it's not as hard to do, you know, well, squats on 30 rep range is fucking hard, right? But like if you're on the chest press, you're doing 30 reps, it's not as hard as doing sets of 4 or 5 on the bench. So be flexible and auto-regulate your training. And I'm a real big believer in that. Even sometimes you might have to do that for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. And you get a promotion, you have to take this new job. I have a lot of business professionals I work with, and they have to be flexible. And I'm like, listen to me, just get your training in, lower the weight, up the reps, and you're going to be okay. Because literally it's splitting hairs, even if it's only for a few weeks and you're a bodybuilder. I mean, I'm not worried about that. So that's my biggest piece of feedback, is just be flexible on the training.
The thing that scares me about that is people grossly underestimate the value of sleep. Grossly underestimate it. You know, you have 5 or 6 sleeps, 90-minute sleep cycles a night. Early in the sleep cycles, it's more non-REM than it is REM, and that non-REM time is when your body is physically recovering. There's all kinds of cool things going on. You're releasing growth hormone, things like that. REM sleep is really helping with brain function, things like that. But I would get really educated on how you can sleep so that when you have the opportunities, you can be a better sleeper, as crazy as that sounds. Like when you get away from blue light, for example, how does that impact your circadian rhythms? But really try to get educated on sleep. It's very, very underrated. And there is all kinds of research out there that shows sleep deprivation has poor effects on insulin sensitivity, that people overeat because they have these leptin and ghrelin imbalances from it. So that split shift stuff always worries me, the sleep aspects. I would just encourage you to try to really get educated on sleep and how to get quality sleep, because I think it's going to be very, very important for you.
Got one more? Two more. We'll get you.
So I have 2 questions. The first one is about like planned diet breaks. So instead of doing like a 1 or 2 day a week refeed, doing like a planned week of a diet break when you're in a cutting phase to kind of extend that cutting phase without getting fatigued by it. And the other question is about sarcopenia. Is there a point when obviously when you're aging, you can't just continue to eat more protein to outweigh the hormonal effects of muscle wasting? And like what hormones are at play in that process?
I'll handle the first one and then I'll pass it. You get the fun sarcopenia question. Plain diet breaks are great. Just give yourself more time to diet. There's nothing wrong with it. And I've seen research that showed the longer diets with the breaks is every bit as effective. It might even showed increased lean muscle retention too, if I'm not mistaken. But the point was that the longer diet break was the longer diet with the diet breaks was fine. There's no issue with that. Getting somebody, when we say diet breaks, it doesn't mean, you should probably clarify that. It doesn't mean that you just kind of eat whatever. It's get you back up to baseline so you're not in a deficit, is how the studies were done.
You can also diet break by taking out cardio for a week, because your intake, your output is less, so you're actually technically eating more, if that makes sense. So you could do it that way too. Just take out the cardio for a week and give your body a break from that and throw it back in.
So there are multiple coaches here too, like Alberto and others that use diet breaks. Will Grazioni is another guy down in Florida. It's not something we typically do with clients. I've done it a few times where I've given people a diet break, but the most important thing related to that is with cardio. I know Marsha's in here, we've done it with you. I did this with Debbie Bailey, and the #1 game changer that I've done over the last 2 years is literally leading into peak week. I don't give a shit how much cardio they're doing. I pull it all out. I had a guy doing an hour of cardio, dropped it out peak week, or 10 days out. You were doing 30 minutes a day, dropped it out. And guess what I saw every single time? They dropped 2 to 3 pounds that week, they're dropping cortisol, their physique looks better, and they feel better. That, to me, a break from cardio, you can kind of consider that in the same sense of a diet break, because cardio is definitely very, it's high stress. And even on the HIIT cardio side, which we're not going to open that can of worms, we did that at the Q&A last night. But even pulling out HIIT towards the end, you're not going to gain fat if you pull an hour of steady state out of your diet. The drop in cortisol is so important and so huge. Marshall, we did that with you twice. Started to increase your food and your weight was going down. Like, so there's some, I said earlier, some unicorn shit. That to me is kind of the equivalent of a diet break when it comes to that. Giving your body a break. One other thing, I had used a diet break one time with a client, and it was Debbie Bailey. And she was dieting now. She's like 50 some odd years old. Very hard to diet her down. She's doing an hour cardio a day, and I don't do that with a lot of clients. Very low calories. And what I did was I slowly started to increase her calories by like a couple hundred calories for a week, dropped her steady state out of there, and guess what? Her body started responding again. So diet breaks can work, but I've also done it on the flip end. I've got a guy right now that I'm doing it with, and he hits his numbers to a T. He's starting to gain weight. I only added a couple hundred calories because his body's just been in a deficit for so long. I think he's putting muscle on, is what I think is happening. He's putting lost muscle on quick, but it's not always the answer. So it's something that you have to kind of play with and get experience with. And I'm not the most experienced diet break coach out there. I've only done it a few times. But the cardio, I can tell you, that's a game changer.
Here comes a hard question.
Sarcopenia.
So, first of all, there is certainly going to be a threshold of protein that's going to promote protein synthesis in everyone. Now, there is some inter-individual variation. We actually just, as part of a meta-analysis with Stu Phillips' lab, just published last year. It's open access. You can look at that. It's really interesting. We looked at protein supplementation. On average, we found that 1.6, a little over 1.6, was the average amount of protein per kilogram that is required to maximize protein synthesis, but the upper confidence interval, which basically, in short course, if you keep running studies over 95% of the time, you're going to get certain values within a range. It was 2.2. So to me, you always want to err on the higher side because you don't know where you're going to be. And if you look at the individual curves, they're always different. So there's really no downside to taking in more. But beyond a certain point, you're not going to keep getting more protein synthesis. So it's going to max out, and that is going to be probably somewhere less than 2.2, maybe 2.0, 1.8, somewhere in there. So what do? Well, there certainly is going to be variability as far as the variables, variability in the variables, meaning repetition range, frequency, volume. You want to maximize or optimize that for the individual because people have different recovery rates. It's not like elderly is not a profile of a person. It's at a chronological age, but I know people who are 70 that are in vastly different shape from one another. So your chronic diseases are going to enter into it. Chronic inflammation is a big aspect. So elderly people tend to have much more chronic inflammatory issues, which actually has a negative effect on your ability to build muscle. Reducing chronic inflammation thus would be an important thing. When it does come down to ultimately, hormonally there are going to be issues. So a woman, we talked before, estrogen is an anabolic hormone. You go through menopause, you're going to have issues. Men, testosterone is going to decline over time. Do you want to take TRT therapy or estrogen therapy? Those are personal choices that I can't comment on. It's up to the individual. But here's one thing I will say. Some real interesting research shows that there's something called satellite cells. And satellite cells, the short course, they are unspecialized cells. They're stem cells, basically muscle stem cells, that they're quiescent. They don't do anything until they are woken up, either through muscle damage or primarily through contractions or combinations of such. Once they are woken up, they serve as repair factors, and they fuse to the muscle cells, and they donate nuclei. And nuclei are what produces proteins. It's the transcription of proteins comes through the nuclei. Think of it like little factories. The more factories you have, the more proteins you can produce. What's really interesting, it's been shown that you have a greater capacity to produce these and to proliferate, to increase these satellite cells earlier in life. So the earlier you start training, at least theoretically, you do retain these satellite cells and thus the nuclei over time. So this is the hypothetical, this is at least where we're going now through the research. The earlier you can start people on training, the more potential they're going to have to avoid sarcopenia later in life. The muscle does have memory, muscle memory, so even if you stop, you still would have greater ability to gain more later in life. So that's kind of the short course for that community.
Yeah, I guess I'll just layer just a tiny bit. I mean, the best course of action is not to wait until somebody is of an advanced age. I mean, we just need to get people active and mechanically stimulating the muscle at an earlier age and build a lifestyle. And I think what's really fun and interesting is you know, some of the work that's being done by Brad and others. We're kind of reshaping how people can train. You know, I mean, we're so far removed from, you know, we were talking about how long we've been training. I got my first weight set when I was, 14. It was concrete-filled plastic from Sears, and it was awesome. But and we've come such a long way. But back then, there was, there was a very tight way in which you train. The timing of the movements, very controlled, and so forth and so on. It's much more dynamic now. You can manipulate load. There's so many other ways to get people involved. If we can get them involved earlier on, and sarcopenia becomes a little bit less of an issue. The two principal and most controllable factors in all of this is going to be the mechanical stimulus of the muscle through resistance training and diet, primarily, with the stimulus of the protein. The two are going to go, sort of hand in hand. And I think what a lot of the research is kind of telling us is that if you start late in life, it just takes more protein to get the same type of response to exercise as well as the same type of response to get to protein itself. But if you are somebody who is a lifestyle training individual throughout decades leading up to that point, you are in a much better advantage than, So I just, it makes me a little bit sad that, we're talking about, people who are 60 and getting them active and getting them training and so forth and so on. So the best, it really is preventative medicine. If we can get them active in training, and finding a comfort level in training and, just some, and maybe progress that into more, I think we're just going to be doing, those are the best prevention tools we've got.
I'm on the last one. Okay. So I know we fine-tune as athletes and nutrient timing and meal timing and everything. Lately, I've noticed that I've gotten lazier with my meal prep. So literally my proteins are chicken and some egg whites, and that's it. What's your feedback on the importance of a variety of protein, not just like from a supplementation standpoint, but eating turkey and chicken and fish as opposed to just eating chicken all the time?
I'll start. And so from like an amino acid standpoint, proteins may be a little bit different in amino acid composition, and some of that just sort of gets washed out when you eat more of it. But when you look at something like fish versus chicken, there are some inherent differences between, because now you start talking about sort of those collateral nutrients which may also be provided. So I think some of it's like that. And I think we all get into sort of these food choice ruts where it's like, chicken again, but it's, you wake up and you're like, I gotta make my chicken, and you just kind of go that way. I don't know if there's an issue with it or whatever. We always talk about variety and so forth. I just think with different protein sources, there are some collateral benefits from other nutrients that may be coming along for the ride, whether they're omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids that you might get in fish, or there's certainly some creatine. There's other nutrients that are inherent to certain protein sources that are attractive as well. So by getting a little overly tight in some of your sourcing, you might be sort of weeding out some of the other, because that's the thing. If you eat, it's just targeting animals, and I'm always just fascinated by the other amino acids that you find in animal foods, or amino acids like, the carnitines and the creatines and the beta-alanines and so forth, that are there too. And they're non-proteogenic. They're not going to be used for building protein, but they serve us just like they serve the animal in other capacities. So I think about, all those ancillary other nutrients as well, and I think that's maybe the beauty of variety.
To add on to that, so I really concur with Rob, I think with maybe just some fine differences that it's kind of cool to look at the different proteins, like Rob talked about whey protein and its digestibility rate versus casein. In practical, in my humble opinion, from a practical standpoint, when you're at your 2.0 per grams per kilogram, 2.2, if you're taking in chicken, which is a complete protein, amino acids, you're getting, so the digestion, also when we're looking at whey digestibility versus casein, if you're just taking whey, who here just all day just has whey or just has casein? So, hopefully no one. So it comes down to that's a cool lab study, but it's a sterile environment that doesn't really tell us about real life or ecological validity. So my comment to that from a protein muscle building standpoint, just from a protein amino acid standpoint, really doesn't matter. But as Rob said, the issue then becomes from other nutraceuticals, if you will, nutrients and nutraceuticals that are obtained through food and through other sources can be very anabolic, or potentially additive from an anabolic standpoint. Rob mentioned omega-3s. I'm actually just collaborating on a review paper on omega-3s and their potential ability to enhance anabolism, sensitivity, signaling sensitivity, and other factors. And there's other factors as well. So you have to look at the totality of your diet, not just looking at chicken. What else are you eating? Are you taking in a lot of flax or fish oil capsules, which might offset that? Or then, if not, do you need to take in salmon and other fishes that do encompass that? So looking at your total nutritional profile rather than just isolating on the protein source would be my recommendation.
100% agree, though I would add two things. Dr. Serrano is a real big believer. He's one of my mentors in rotating foods on occasion to avoid food insensitivity. We see that with chicken a lot. We see with egg whites a lot. When you just eat the same thing over and over and over and over and over, you start to have some issues digesting it. So just from that standpoint, I would just add that as well. It's good to have some variety. You know, you don't see people with scurvy and pellagra, and, you know, beriberi and rickets and all that stuff. But I still think variety is a good thing. So.
Okay, so first of all, let's give a round of applause to our Q&A panel. And once again, congratulations to John Meadows for being the very first Inspiration Award winner here at the Physique Summit. Before we break, we do want to say if you have a vendor table, meet me here right after this. If not, guys, we will see you at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Michelle. Okay, finish?
Yeah.
Okay, hit that?
Yep.
I was like, wait, there's no stop button. This is finished.
So I told the guy yesterday that I would move him